Hi everyone, it's me, Arden Lee. First of all, I wanted to say thank you guys so much for all the love that you left on my last video about how to navigate the twin flame path to sacred union. And I mentioned in that video that I would be doing a follow-up video with some Q&A and taking your questions. So thank you guys so much for sending those questions in. I've got those written down on a note card right here. So I'm gonna go ahead and take this opportunity to go ahead and answer some of those. If you haven't yet seen that previous video on twin flames, on navigating the twin flame path to sacred union, some of the things that I talk about in this video might sound a little confusing. So I would go back and watch that one first if you haven't already. But if you did, and maybe if you were one of those folks who asked an amazing question, then here we go. All right, first question. When you say that twin flames can work for anyone in the world, how effective is it for people who don't believe in all this? How does it work when there are too many obstacles between the two people that makes it impossible for them to even physically meet? Okay, so those are two separate questions. So I'm gonna go ahead and address those one at a time. So for the first one, when you say that twin flames can work for anyone in the world, and by that I essentially mean that the twin flame path to sacred union is something that, in my experience, can be called in. You don't have to be born a twin flame, right? You might be born with a desire in you for romantic partnership, or you might not, right? If you're not into romantic partnership, then you probably, then the twin flame path, it's like there's, you know, what would be the point for you, right? That would be wasted effort if you'd rather spend your time doing something else. But there's no sort of, people on the twin flame path often have this sort of like, well, am I a twin flame? Am I not a twin flame? How can I tell? And really, I mean, I guess the way that you tell is, do you have an intention to create true love relationships in your life, to be able to align yourself internally to attract a soulmate relationship? And then the twin flame path is basically that sort of set of instructions, aided by some divine intervention, to help you bring up and heal and release any conditioning that you've taken along the way in your lifetime, or perhaps even in past lifetimes, if you're into that, that would be in the way of you forming that relationship, right? So, unhealthy attachment patterns, beliefs about love and relationships, learned responses toward your partners that aren't actually helping you create that true love relationship, et cetera, et cetera. And what it does is it brings all of those up so that those can be cleared. And how does it do that? It does that by introducing you to the person who is your twin flame, right? And what your twin flame is the twin flame dynamic is a mathematical equation by which you attract a person who shares your values, tends to share your core wounds as they're showing up in that moment, and but has those things expressed oppositionally through different polarities, right? So your attachment styles, one of you might be anxious, one of you might be avoidant, and those mirror one another, right? Your like those are like equidistant from like the 0 point where you would be balanced in like secure attachment, right? Or your trauma responses might be like hyperarousal and desensitization. Your orientation for the way that you think about the world might be like right brain versus left brain, etc. And so when you meet your twin flame, they are the person who represents the mirror image of where you're at that moment in time, right? And the whole idea of the twin flame path is that once you know, like once you see your mirror, you understand like where you're at in your own process, and then you can use that information to bring yourself into balance, right? And once you are at that place, theoretically, right? Like these are models of understanding. There's no like, there's, you know, we're all humans, we're all flawed. There's never like perfection, as much as I would love for there to be. But the idea is that you bring yourself into balance, and then you attract a person who is also in balance, right? Like you never see someone going around like with a really like secure, healthy attachment style and a great attitude toward relationships, like really connecting deeply with someone who is like super not not like in a falling in love romantic sense. Like that's very, you know, that's very rare. And if that did happen, then that would be interesting. Like Well, what is that mirroring, right? So the question, so that's what the twin flame paradigm is, right? And the question of how effective is it for people who don't believe in all this? Well, if you don't believe in don't believe in magic, don't believe in twin flames, the idea of twin flames, is, as I'm explaining it, is not, your twin flame is just someone who represents those oppositional polarities. So they're not like a magical person falling out of the sky, right? They're very much human. They just happen to match this, they happen to mirror you in all the expressions of your different polarities, and they share that same energetic frequency, that same core vibration, or shared values, essentially, that people in the twin flame communities online will call it like a shared soul song, right? You share the same song in your soul, or whatever, which is, I think, just a fancy way of saying shared values and shared passions, shared you're just kind of on a similar vibe, you're just alike and all that. So, well, if you don't believe in the path, probably you're not going to do the work. Right? So do you have to believe it? Let me address it this way. Do you have to believe in magic for magic to work? You have to not disbelieve in it, right? Because if you disbelieve it, then you're going to look for evidence that it's not working. Oh, see, I did this, but it didn't work, or whatever, right? In my experience, because I was not someone who believed in magic when I started practicing it, but I was open, I was curious. I was basically like, let me see what happens when I do this. So I went in with good faith, right? If you're going into it in good faith, then that's all the belief that you need. Good faith, open mind, and willingness to commit to the work. Yeah, hopefully that answers that part of that question. How does it work when there are too many obstacles between the two people that makes it impossible for them to even physically meet? All right, this is a great question. So the phrase that popped into my head was, with God, all things are possible. I'm like, I don't want to like skip straight to God. Let me not like lose everyone, right? When I met the second person who showed up as a mirror to my polarities, right? So my second twin flame on the path, right? And I put that in quotes because, again, there's so much distortion out there that says, oh, your twin flame is the person who's destined for you and whatever. No, it's whoever is mirroring you in that moment, right? So when I met that person, I met them because of a viral video that they were in that got like 30 million views online. They lived overseas from me. We had one person we knew in common, and we didn't even know that person very well. So there was almost no connection between us in the physical world. And yet, I discovered this person's viral video. I was impressed by their work, and I reached out to them, just sent them, a friend request on Facebook. And when they accepted my request, I messaged them just to say like hi and thanks or whatever, and give them a compliment on the video that I'd seen. And we started chatting back and forth, and it was really like within 5 minutes that this person was like, I want to work with you. Let's make this happen. And from there I was like, yes, I want to work with you too. And the rest, just unfolded over the next couple months. So, impossibility in physical reality is something I invite you to release, because there are things that can happen if there is divine intervention at play. If the universe really wants, let me tell you what my facilitator told me. My facilitator said, there was at one point, I was asking something, but how or what, or, how is this going to happen or whatever. And she goes, Arden, that you could move to the side of a mountain in the middle of nowhere. And if you were meant to be with this person, he would fall out of an airplane and land through your roof. That might be a slight exaggeration, mostly because I'm sure someone wouldn't survive that fall, but the point stands, right? So you can't miss what's meant for you. And the more, I think the point of the twin flame path is to cultivate more trust, and to continue releasing attachment, right? And it's even possible that that is showing up specifically to help you clear that belief, right? Now that would assume that there is divine intervention at play. And sometimes our conditioning can cause us to think something is, meant to be, when really, we're kind of telling ourselves what we want to hear, right? So there might be, let's say, well, I'll use like one of my former relationships before the twin flame path, right? Or probably any of them really. Any of my former relationships before I was exposed to the twin flame path, I would have been like scheming, right? I mean, I was literally a pickup artist, right? So I was always calculating like, oh, how am I going to run into them? Or how can I make this happen or that happen? And yeah, and what I have learned is that me trying to make things happen in a way is actually keeping me out sometimes of the things that I'm meant for. Now that doesn't mean that I don't have to do like put work behind my goals, right? So I'm trying to like make sure that anything I say doesn't get, twisted and warped to mean like the other thing, right? So it is possible that if you have an attachment to a person who is maybe not being, matched with you by the universe so that you can learn from that experience, if you just have feelings for someone, we can all have plenty of feelings out of our wounding, out of our attachment, and out of our conditioning. And I think part of the point of the twin flame path is to release those things and to trust that our intentions, the way that we set our intentions, to trust in the universe to provide for those and to give us the things that we're asking for, as long as we're asking for those things that are not so specific in confirmed reality, like I want a relationship with that person, and are more like, I want a relationship that has these qualities, right? I mean, that's one of the biggest lessons that I learned on the twin flame path, is that not attaching to a specific person, right? Because your twin flame is not even a specific person. There might be a specific person who is showing up in the present moment to mirror you and teach you about yourself. But that doesn't mean that you're necessarily going to end up together. Because you have to get yourself to that balance on the journey. And whether they do that work or not is honestly, it's up to them, right? But if you were to use what you're learning from the connection and what's being brought up for you, and you were to begin to repattern yourself into more and more inner balance and inner harmony, then yeah, right? Then, then you might meet a new person from that place. All right, hopefully that answers that question. When you say you cast a spell, what exactly is the process, and what is it that you have to do for it to work successfully? All right, great question. So I use predominantly, for I would say more than 90% of the spells that I cast, I use a combination of sigil magic and candle magic. I use a formula for sigil magic that was, to my knowledge, first developed by Austin Osman Spare, and then taught by Grant Morrison. And I won't spend this video unpacking that because that's kind of a separate topic, but basically what I do is I craft a sigil for my sentence of intention, and then I carve that sigil onto the side of a candle, and I burn it down, and that's it. And then I set it and forget it, right? Part of magic, part of successful magic, is releasing what is known as lust for result, right? If you're constantly like, it's like basically saying like a watched pot never boils, right? If you're constantly like, oh, when is it happening or whatever. In my opinion, I think this is because we start looking for ways that it might show up in physical reality, and we limit ourselves to the ways that we're not seeing. Whereas when we kind of just trust and forget about it, the thing that we are casting for may show up for us in a way that we had not anticipated, right? And so if we're constantly looking for it to come through one route and we expect it to come through there, then it might come from somewhere else and we wouldn't even be around to recognize it, right? I mean, usually it does. Things that show up that are magical tend to have a really interesting signature to them, right? Like they tend to impact us, or we tend to get a confirmation about it, or it's just like stuff will start showing up in all corners of our reality, you know, saying this, right? Like flashing, flashing neon lights basically, right? But yeah, you want to release that attachment. And so that's why, yeah, basically what I do, I create a sigil, I carve that sigil onto a candle, I burn that candle, and then I just trust that it's going to happen in good time, in divine timing. Next question, how do we know for sure if someone is our twin flame? What are these signs you were seeing that convinced you? All right, so the way that I define whether a person is a twin flame is, again, do I see that mirrored polarity, right? Is there that remarkable shared energetic signature between us where we might even resemble one another? We have a similar vibe going on. Again, shared values, shared wounds usually. But now that I'm less wounded, it's become slightly less, the wounds have become slightly less relevant than they were when I was at the start of my path. And again, you're going to see that expressed oppositionally. So after a while, you can almost kind of see the math of it kind of working out, right? That said, I think something that's really important to address is that when I first started on this path, it was really difficult for me to believe that the connection was mutual, because I was not getting a lot of signs from the person in physical, well, I mean, I was not getting a lot of like validation from the person in physical reality, but that partly was a sign in itself, and the way that it expressed itself, because the first person who catalyzed my twin flame awakening, it was maybe just a couple months after our meeting and becoming intimate and getting to know one another, that all of a sudden I could sense this sort of like, oh shit, like happening in this person, to where it went from being like, you know, we were cool. It was like, oh, hey, you know, he would see me from across the room and his eyes would light up. Oh my gosh, it's you or whatever, and come over to me. And it went from being that to being like, oh my God, like this visceral reaction of nervousness in this person. So I knew at that point, even though I wasn't, you know, even though I didn't really understand the twin flame path at that point, I didn't even really fully believe in it. I had kind of just heard of it and it sounded kind of ridiculous to me. I knew I was not being rejected in the same way I had experienced rejection before, because I'd been, you know, I'd been with plenty of guys in my life where it's like, you know, you'll see them and they'll just be like, oh yeah, you know what, like, you know, you're being dismissed, you know that. And this was like, all right, something different is happening here. There's some, you know, there's definitely like a bizarre sort of charge or shockwave that is happening, even if this person is kind of avoiding me. It seems like he's not avoiding me out of dismissiveness. It seems like he's avoiding me out of avoidance of the intensity. That wasn't, even then, that was, you know, I had so many experiences of rejection prior to that even then that was like, oh geez, you know, it was really hard to convince myself that I was not just being rejected, right? But there was something that was different from it. So I do think it's important that, you know, that person may not choose to follow through on the connection, and they might not choose to follow through on the path. And as I mentioned in the last video, I eventually lost touch with that person because I was growing at a rate and they were not showing up in a way that was matching that growth for me anyway. So I do think, though, it's important that we come to learn the difference between a connection that is being avoided because of its intensity and someone who's just not interested in us, right? And I could feel qualitatively the difference in that, for sure. It was hard to believe at first, but there was definitely a difference. What are some of the signs I was seeing that convinced me? Pulling a tarot card that was like exactly the same as their album art, for one. Yeah. the same title and the same image on it, which like I wish I could show, but obviously I want to be confidential about, you know, everyone who is involved, so I'm not going to reveal any identifying details. But it was so strong that even people who were not like typically believers in magic, I showed them that and they were like, whoa, that is super weird, right? Me being like, what do I need to know about my love life? And it was like, that's the one. It was very bizarre, because I pulled that card that resembled, you know, their song and album art with along with the 10 of Cups, which is like the happy ever after card, right? So that was a big one. But also just like I said, the universe will start like just pointing flashing lights toward you when this stuff kind of happens, and you'll come across, you know, all of a sudden, you know, I'd gone from knowing nothing about twin flames to seeing twin flames everywhere, and just seeing these just, you know, messages that I'd read things that maybe had like the same essential message to them from 3 completely different sources within the same period of about 24 to 48 hours. And that's how I would know, like, oh, that's something I'm supposed to pay attention to. Another one was seeing for the person who lived overseas, I started counting, it'd be like, you know, 2, 3, 4 times a day, I would see the place that they lived, you know, like just online or out in the world or whatever, just mentions of like where they were. My parents even like started taking a course on the culture, like completely randomly, right? So sometimes you look at something and you're like, oh, that's just the algorithm showing me more of what I want to see, or I typed that word in the chat, or I said something about it, so now it's, you know, but it would show me stuff that was like definitively not advertisements. And then there were things that had nothing to do with anything I said online, right? Which like my parents deciding to like take a course about this, this region that this person lived in, like before I had told them about it, you know, stuff like that. So all of a sudden it's just like, you're just seeing stuff about it everywhere. And funny enough, I had the feeling that I might have been meeting another twin flame, and I was seeing all the math line up, and I was like, that's interesting, but I'm not getting those like everyday signs of, you know, like I was the last time or whatever. And the minute I thought that, I was like, well, first I was like, is that because the universe knows that I don't need those signs anymore because I do recognize the math and I know what this is? And I was like, but I want the signs, like give me the signs. And literally the very next day I started seeing them again. It was like stuff that we had talked about would start showing up in reality, or, you know, and then I started seeing the place that they live showing up like literally like 3-4 times a day. And so just to make sure that it wasn't my confirmation bias, I started also counting instances of where the last twin flame that I had, like when I saw the place that they lived popping up, I was like, let me also count how many times I see that and make sure there's actually more of this new one than the old one, that I'm not just, you know, like hacking my own confirmation bias to see more about what I want to see. And sure enough, some days there would be like one instance of me seeing the place where the last person lived, and like 4 instances of the, you know, the newer person. So those are some examples of signs that can show up in your reality. But specifically if you're especially if you're at the beginning of the twin flame path, I know for me, it was just like stuff that I needed to hear spiritually a lot. Like whether it was videos, posts, articles, essays, even just, you know, little quotes on Instagram, where I would just be like, oh wow, that really like I feel like that was written for me. Like I feel like that was, you know, that completely applies to my situation, even though it was, you know, has nothing to do with me. It was written by a person who doesn't know me. But you start seeing those and really feeling like the way that those hit, and those are probably some lessons that you're supposed to pay attention to. That goes for any kind of a magical path or magical journey of transformation, but especially on the twin flame path. That was true for me. All right, next question. Do you believe that this is the orthodox or commonly meant concept of what a twin flame is, or is this just your understanding of the twin flame concept? Okay, great question. So, I believe that the commonly understood concept of twin flames is highly distorted, right? It is based on an idea that we want it's based on this idea of soulmates, right? It's based on this idea of a perfect balanced, true love relationship. And that's great, right? But the way that it's commonly taught, that I experienced, is that you've met your twin flame and you do the work, and then you'll definitely end up with the person, and they're definitely thinking of you no matter what you see in your 3D reality. You have this bond together, and that's really not healthy. And it's also a paradox, right? And it's not even a good kind of a spiritual paradox. It's like an oxymoron, because in order to achieve the vibration of sacred union, what we need to do is master unconditional love. And unconditional love is essentially non-attachment, right? So the orthodox or commonly meant concept of twin flames often is like, oh, here's this person and they're meant for you. You're destined to be together, right? No matter what they have to say about it, right? If this is your twin flame. So I was like, how do I know if this person's my twin flame or not, right? Because at the time I thought that meant that they were like definitely the one for me, right? When really what they are is, again, they're that mirrored reflection of who you are in a sort of mathematical way, so that you can see yourself, so that you can learn from it, so that you can bring yourself into balance. That means that someone can be your twin flame in this moment, and that, you know, maybe they don't grow with you and you grow past them, or you grow away from them and whatever, or they grow away from you. And then in that moment, you know, you're gonna resonate with someone else, right? And that's what most people who teach the twin flame path, especially professionally, fail to mention, because people who are starting on the twin flame path, I remember I certainly was like this. I did not want to hear that person was not my twin flame, and that instead of, you know, oh, I've met my soulmate and everything is going to be better now, that I had this extraordinarily arduous spiritual journey ahead of me. So yeah, it doesn't make for very good marketing, right? Everyone wants like the easy solution where it's just like, oh, just purchase this download or this clearing, and then they'll reach out to you right away. And it's not like that hasn't happened sometimes. Like, I've had sessions with my own facilitator, who does not market her work like that, by the way. But I have had sessions with her sometimes, and sometimes literally 1 minute after I hang up the phone on that session, I'll get, you know, contact from the person or whatever that has, you know, that maybe even is relevant to the things that I was just discussing in the session or whatever. So sometimes that can happen, but you really can't outsource your work with downloads and clearings. You know, you have to be doing that work yourself to get yourself to the vibration of sacred union. And if you're as laden with conditioning as I was when I started, well, in my case, it was a lot of work, right? So not everyone is down for that kind of a workload, right? This started for me in 2016. It's 2022. I'm still going, right? And even then, over these past 6 years, it's been such a vast transformation. So it's not like I've been slacking off, right? Yeah. But for sure, if someone had said to me in the beginning, like, you're gonna have 6 years of hard work in front of you, I'm not sure I wouldn't have just been like, all right, I rescind my spell, just send me a boyfriend. You know, I don't, this soulmate stuff is too hard. I don't think I would have. Once I understood it was what it was, I was like, well, I opened that can of worms, I better do that now. You know, I did. But here's the thing, is that the way that I'm explaining it is the only way that the math checks out. Because if you have attachment to a specific person, right, then you're likely not going to allow yourself to grow if they're not growing with you, because you feel like, well, they're my twin flame, so I gotta just work at this path. But then you don't work, you know, you don't work on yourself, right? You stay in this connection that maybe is stagnating and maybe is not actually moving anywhere. And there was only so long that I could do that before I finally was like, this isn't healthy. I need to let go. This is not good. This is making me feel bad about myself. And as I said in the last video, of course, immediately as soon as I did that, 4 days later, I connected with the next person who would mirror my energies. So that is the difference. So that's my understanding based on my own experience, as someone who has dedicated herself to this path. for the last 6 years. I guess technically 7 years since I originally cast the soulmate spell, 6 years since I met my first twin flame catalyst, and 5 years since I accepted that it was real. Since I actually said, okay, I'm on the twin flame path, I might as well do it. How long since soul recognition? Well, maybe that last thing that I said just answered that. I'm not sure what this person meant by soul recognition. How long since soul recognition? As I said, I started, I cast for the ability to attract a soulmate relationship. I cast for that in 2015. The first thing, as I said, the first thing it did was it brought back my ex so that I could inoculate myself against any further attachment to him. And then it was 2016 when I first met my first twin flame catalyst. And then it was 2017 when I accepted that the path was real and committed myself to doing it as quickly as I possibly could. And what about the Kundalini awakening? Did that energy go away eventually? That's a great question. So Kundalini awakening is, I suppose in this context, it's another term for spiritual awakening. And, it definitely comes with a lot of, it's definitely a big shakeup, right? I don't know if you guys have seen that meme where it's like, what I think a spiritual awakening is, or like what people think a spiritual awakening looks like, and it's someone like meditating on this like beautiful yoga mat, in this peaceful, serene setting. And then it's like what a spiritual awakening actually feels like, and it's someone like curled up in bed being like, I'm not crazy, and can confirm. So once your existing worldview gets broken up, there's less to break then, right? What I will say for me, because the question is, did that energy go away eventually? Well, yeah, I'm not as shocked anymore, right? I've sort of rearranged my own internal patterns and systems in order to adapt to this new information, which has been very good and very healthy for me. But something that I have also chosen for myself is I have chosen to really live on the edge of my expansion. That sounds super pretentious. But basically what I mean is, at this point in my life, I could, I could settle down somewhere. I could, just continue teaching as I'm teaching, and just expand my business and live a quite happy life, right? But I'm me. And there's a lot of things that I'm interested in achieving and seeing what's possible. So once I repatterned, which to me, my spiritual awakening was essentially, it was my repatterning, right? Or it led to my repatterning, at least, if you want to define them slightly differently. But following that initial sort of blast through of consciousness that sort of broke my former worldview, I have chosen to continue repatterning in order to see how far I can take my own personal success and impact and happiness and expansion. So oftentimes it feels like it has not slowed down, but I think that's more because of my own personal choices around it, and not so much that the Kundalini energy has to be there forever. I really want to emphasize like our free will in all of this. Even when we have a spiritual awakening, yeah, to some extent we can't put those worms back in the can, right? We sort of that toothpaste gets squeezed out the tube, and it's like there's certain things that you can't unsee, right? But for some people, when that first crack starts to happen and they get an idea of what's happening and they're like, nope, absolutely not, putting all that back, that does not feel good, right? I've seen that happen a lot in my own work. Like I say about my course, the repatterning project, all the time. People either change their lives entirely or they drop out around week 3, right? So, yeah. So on some level, you can't really unsee that, but we always have free will to do with that information what we want, and we don't ever have to take it farther than we want to. Something that was really interesting that I think I brought up in my last video was a friend of mine, a woman by the name of Angela Hale. I had noticed a pattern of mine where once I noticed it, I understood that it was something that was coming up along the twin flame path for me to be able to release. And it was pretty difficult because it was a pattern that existed for me since like pre-memory, right? Since before I have any memory of, I don't have any memory of being any other way. So whether that was something that was from my very early childhood, or whether I came into this world with that karma on me, right? Or, with that belief. But it was really difficult. And something that my friend Angela said to me is, she's like, Arden, you don't have to change this. I was like, yeah, you're probably right. But I came this far, like I'm not giving up here, and sure enough, it was very shortly after I released that I felt a big step forward on the path, looking back now. So, but again, it's our free will, right? We can, at any point in the path, say like, I have gotten enough out of this to be content, and I'm gonna go and be peaceful now. Or we can say, all right, I got this much, what else can I do? And that's clearly what I've chosen to do. For now, anyway. Maybe there will be a time that I rest. But considering that I have a dopamine deficiency and I need to be apparently constantly solving puzzles in order to make my brain want to keep itself alive, chances are I probably won't. Chances are I may be going at this, hopefully not quite this pace because I am pretty tired, but yeah, call in a little bit more, stability overall, but I think I'm always going to be curious. I'm always going to be expanding. So yeah, it's up to you what you do with it. All right, well, that brings me to the end of my questions, or your questions, shall I say. And just real quick, I probably should have made this announcement at the beginning of the video, but I totally didn't. I am teaching a class on narrative magic, as I mentioned in the last video. The primary means that I used since about 2018 to accelerate myself on the twin flame path was that of the hypersigil. And that was extraordinarily magical of an experience for me. It is also how I came to understand the twin flame paradigm as I'm explaining it as this mathematical equation between two people who mirror one another. Because, as I said, I replicated the exact circumstances that I wrote about in my original twin flame catalyzation. By the time I got to track 7, I replicated the same exact circumstances that I'd written about in track 1 with a different person. So it was through that hypersigil that I was able to understand this information to begin with. And I am teaching a course on narrative magic that begins on April 24th. It is a 4-week course. It is called Myths and Magic, Changing Your Life Through Story. And it is about using narrative magic and the power of archetype to transform your reality. So if that sounds like something that you might be interested in, go ahead and leave a comment. You can look up a little bit of information about that course on my website, therepatterningproject.com. Or you can find me on Facebook, which is where I post about all my classes and courses. Or like I just said, just leave a comment in the video or reach out to me privately and I'll send you the post with all the information. But it goes for 4 weeks, and it's a really fun way to live magically, right? By not just watching or reading our stories, but by bringing them to life in our own lives and allowing the stories that we love, like allowing ourselves to whatever degree is healthy, right? To live those out and to take on those characteristics of those narratives and archetypes in order to facilitate our own personal transformation and the creation of our reality. So if that sounds fun, again, reach out to me. Thank you guys for watching this video. And yeah, let me know what else you want to see, and I'll see you next time.